Hello and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event in our ransomware series, The Realities of Remote Workers and Ransomware Risk. Now, before we get to today's timely information, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative session for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that come in. That Q&A panel is also the place to just say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We'd love to hear where you're logging in from. And it's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event you have any technical issues. A browser refresh will fix most issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. At the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these Expert Series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field. But the support of our sponsors makes it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to all the companies that made this possible. Over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today, and they'll refer to links that you can find in your handout section of the console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handout section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media resources. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events, including another Expert Series event next month on ransomware. So before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors. So we're sponsored by Keeper. Keeper protects organizations against cyber threats with zero trust and zero knowledge security. You can achieve full visibility, security, and control across every user on every device. You can try it free at keepersecurity.com. We are also brought to you by CrowdStrike. Identity-based attacks have increased with remote work adoption. There's been a 297% increase in intrusions involving credential access abuse. 25% of the attacks are from unmanaged hosts. So click on the Learn More button or the button in your handout to find out more from CrowdStrike. We're brought to you by Rubrik. Companies around the world rely on Rubrik, the pioneer in zero trust data security for business resilience against cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruptions. Rubrik Security Cloud, powered by machine intelligence, enables their customers to secure data across their enterprise, cloud, and SaaS applications. They automatically protect data from cyber attacks, continuously monitor data risks, and quickly recover data and applications. You can learn more at rubrik.com/ransomware. We are also sponsored by Duo. Duo is a cloud-based security platform that protects access to all applications for any user and device from anywhere. It's designed to be easy to use, administer, and deploy while providing complete endpoint visibility and control. This combination of user and device trust builds the foundation for a zero-trust security model. You can start a free Duo trial today at the link signup.duo.com. And last but not least, we are sponsored by OVH Cloud. Will your disaster recovery solution recover successfully? You can download their white paper in your handout section to learn how to achieve IT resilience through 3 core pillars. You can learn whether backup what's the best approach to backup and replication. You'll find valuable information about classifying your data into 3 key categories and learn more about the disaster recovery solution that meets your needs and budgets. So get a copy of that report either with the link right here or in your handout section. Okay, and with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Allan Liska. Allan's a CSIRT at Recorded Future, but beyond his title, he's my favorite ransomware expert. He's involved in ransomware responses 7 days a week. He's first call from a lot of reporters and government officials, corporate officials when there's a new attack type, and he's a regular contributor to our website, ransomware.org, as well as the author of the book, Ransomware, Understand, Prevent, and Recover. Allan, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be here. Always enjoy talking to you and your team.
Well, we've got a great topic today, so I'm going to get out of the way and let you get on with it. Thanks for being here.
Sounds good. Thanks. So, it's kind of ironic that Scott mentioned talking about the sort of the latest in ransomware, because we're going to go back a couple years to start this presentation when we talk about remote work and ransomware. So before I do that, though, I want to talk about where we kind of stand with ransomware so far in 2022. Right now, we've had 1,500 victims posted to ransomware extortion sites. That's fewer than at this time last year. But we're also finding that ransomware actors are using ransomware extortion sites less often. Not that they aren't engaging in secondary and tertiary extortion, just that the ransomware extortion sites have become a less reliable metric. But broadly speaking, ransomware attacks are still continuing at a record pace. But we're also seeing much more law enforcement action taken against ransomware groups than we have in the past. So just in the last year, we've seen at least 30 law enforcement actions taken against ransomware groups, which is having some interesting effects. Probably a conversation for another webinar, but it is having some interesting effects on the ransomware ecosystem. So let's start by going back to March of 2020. And what we had happen, obviously, was coronavirus, and companies that could sent many of their workers home, and everybody started working from home that could, often for the first time, which meant that a lot of organizations set up what at the time was considered to be temporary work from home solutions. Sometimes using just whatever they happened to have handy in because they didn't have time to get new equipment or procure new things. So you kind of MacGyvered together with duct tape and baling wire a work from home solution and then sent everybody home. Problem is that those temporary solutions wound up not being temporary. Pandemic lasted, I think, a lot longer than most people expected. We're still in the pandemic. And so those temporary work from solutions became permanent, and turns out a lot of people liked working from home, so that work from home became a new norm for a lot of the organizations. And if you're an organization that's been designed from the ground up to support and handle work from home options, that was fine because you had infrastructure and you had people in place that were kind of experts in that. But if you weren't, it became a big problem. And we saw this in the second half of 2020 and into 2021, where ransomware attacks increased significantly in the second half of 2020. And then in 2021, we just saw an explosion. Scott and I have talked about this before. If you go to January of any year since 2018 and look for the headline, blank, year before was the year of ransomware. So 2017, 18, 19, 20, you'll find a headline that said this year was the year of ransomware. 2021 really was the year of ransomware, just in terms of the scope and viciousness of the attacks. So we did see this huge explosion in attacks. And part of that is because you had this expanded attack surface now. So, for example, COVID-19 became a top phishing lure for ransomware and other groups. We saw that repeatedly, where COVID-19 was a very, very effective lure by all these different ransomware groups. starting off with information about COVID-19, then information about vaccines. Again, all of it, kind of fake information. It was just the title was all that mattered. And people were eager to click. They were eager to find out what was going on. And unfortunately, that led to a big increase in ransomware attacks that way. But then we also saw this increase in exploitation. Um, so Pulse Secure VPN was targeted very heavily. Fortinet VPN was targeted. SonicWall's VPN was targeted. Sophos's VPN was targeted. Palo Alto's VPN was targeted. Um, of the 50 plus exploits that we saw ransomware actors use in 2020 and 2021, almost a third of them were related to work from home activities. So ransomware actors really, really like to take advantage of this work from home infrastructure and go after it. The other thing that we saw that was a big there was a big area of growth for ransomware groups and their initial access brokers in 2020 and 2021 um, was the um, was the expansion of credential reuse. So you now had everybody working from home, and they all had to log in remotely to the office, and so suddenly credentials became much more valuable because more and more organizations had VPN concentrators or other remote work, whether it's Citrix, remote desktop protocol, whatever, and so ransomware actors would hunt for uh, um, employee credential dumps from certain companies that they had found remote infrastructure for, and with literally billions of stolen credentials available in underground markets, it almost was not very hard to find employees that you could use to kind of go after employee credentials to go after this exposed infrastructure that you found. I mean, we saw that with Colonial Pipeline, obviously, one of the biggest ransomware attacks of 2021. It was because there were employee credentials that were available in the underground market. And while this employee no longer worked at the company, those credentials hadn't been removed from hadn't been removed from their VPN concentrator. The ransomware actors were able to walk right in with those creds. So that combination of COVID-19 based phishing lures, exploitation on remote work infrastructure, and then the credential reuse being much more prominent in 2021 meant there was a lot of activity for ransomware actors to go after. Um, and again, all of this was helped by the fact that you had now had a much bigger attack surface, because it wasn't everything contained within a building or a couple of buildings. It was everybody's home essentially became an office. And that expanded attack surface was something that ransomware groups and the initial access brokers that support ransomware groups just attacked voraciously and continue to. And we saw a huge expansion in the whole ransomware economy, because so many people were coming to the ransomware economy because it was seen as a way to make money. So there were more people carrying out more ransomware attacks. And again, going back to many of these systems that were set up, these remote work systems were meant to be temporary, but when they became permanent, a lot of organizations did not go back and do a security review to ensure that everything was properly implemented. And that, again, that became that continues to be a problem. Whenever you put in new infrastructure like this, again, even if it's temporary, there should be security in mind. And not having done a security review, not being aware of what the vulnerabilities are, makes these systems more susceptible. And so what you wound up with during the pandemic, and that continues to today, is an expanded attack surface with limited security oversight. And that's just a recipe for all kinds of ransomware attacks. Um, So a lot of security teams will blame employees for not securing, or not securing their systems, or for clicking on a phishing link. What we affectionately like to call PEBCAC. Oh, I'm sorry, I spelled that wrong. Problem exists between chair and keyboard. But it really isn't accurate to say that. It's easy to get mad at an employee because they clicked on a link that they probably shouldn't have, but really it's our job in security to make sure that that link never reaches them in the first place. And that's part of the challenges that we had with this work from home, is that many organizations that weren't using a lot of cloud-based solutions suddenly had employees who were checking email, or working from home without a lot of the security protocols that they had in place. For example, my wife worked at a local hospital, and when they sent everybody to work from home, they expected you to work from home with whatever equipment you had at home. Now, my wife lives in our house, and our house is quite secure, but not everybody has that luxury. Yeah, in fact, it was funny. She had a call in with the help desk who had remoted in to help, and they were surprised at how much more secure her laptop was at home than the desktops they have at the office, which I take as a bit of a compliment. But you know but for a lot of organizations, they just didn't have a security plan in place, so they sent everybody home without any guidance. Here's what you need to do in order to protect yourself, or sometimes even without equipment. So we need to do a better job with that, because work from home is not going anywhere. um uh the that is here to stay. So we need to do a better job of offering guidance to employees, but also protecting them no matter where they are, making sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that they're not getting those phishing emails, ensuring that their workstations are properly patched, and making sure that we're extending that protection that we offer inside the building to everywhere they go. Um, and so what I like to tell organizations that I talk to is, I completely understand that that a lot of these work from home solutions were sent out remotely, or were sent out at the last minute with whatever you happen to have in hand. That no one's at fault for that. But if 2 years later that's still the case, then that's on us as security teams, and we need to do a better job of fixing that and making sure that everybody's secure. So how do we do that? So again, we're not going to cancel work from home as much as we would like to. We're not going to cancel working from home. Turns out most employees actually like working from home at least some of the time. Um, and you're going to lose good employees if you take that option away from them and they like it. So what we need to do is we need to start working with our work from home employees to make sure that they have the protections they need. Start with better email security. Phishing is a problem, not just for ransomware, but for business email compromise, for credential theft, for all of the things that come through phishing. We need to make sure that we're protecting them, no matter where they are. And often that means a cloud-based mail security program, but make sure that your cloud-based mail security program is actually catching the things that matter to you, that they're staying up to date and alerting on the things that really matter. Um, we need to make sure that we are regularly patching endpoints if they are company controlled. If they're not company controlled, we need to have a process in place for employees so that they can better improve. They know that here's your responsibility. Oftentimes, you can set that up. You can set up blockers at your VPN that said, hey, if somebody's trying to connect to the VPN and they're not at least this patch level of Windows, then we're not going to let them connect. That's also a great way to stop a lot of credential reuses, because a lot of the ransomware groups tend to use like Kali Linux or whatever, and they're trying to connect in. It's not a Windows system, and that is the norm for your organization. just don't let them into your VPN. Now it's different if you allow people to operate with different kind of OSs, but make sure that you're providing real actionable information that employees can use, because I know if you don't, they're just going to ignore that update from Microsoft that keeps coming down. Fortunately, I think Microsoft is getting better at that, so that the auto update happens sometimes at the worst possible minute, but it still happens. But you do want to make sure that they're regularly patching, and make sure that they're regularly patching not just the workstation itself, but whatever browser they're using, and other tools. You've got to prioritize patching of your work from home infrastructure. Ransomware actors are really good at building out vulnerability or building out exploits for known vulnerabilities for VPN concentrators. They've gotten really good at it. They know how to do that. So you want to make sure that you are properly patching that work from home and processing it. And then you want to monitor for credential leaks. There are a lot of really good services. Have I Been Pwned is an excellent service. You can plug your corporate domain in there, your organizational domain, and you can get all of these alerts whenever employee credentials are published on underground forums. And understand that an employee credential being stolen doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. Oftentimes, employees will sign up for other events using their work email address, and unfortunately there's also a lot of password reuse. So the password they're using to log into their corporate systems, they may use for this other system as well. And if that's the case, you wind up with a third party vendor that's been hit, but your employees and their passwords are exposed as part of that. So whenever you find this information, you really want to force a password change. And I will add, and I'm glad to see that Duo was a sponsor for today. Multi-factor authentication everywhere you can. It's so important. Yes, there are sometimes ways around multi-factor authentication. Most criminals don't have access to those means, and so you'll foil so many attacks just by having multi-factor authentication enabled. And so so I highly recommend that. Again, I want to thank you all for attending today, and I really want to thank the team at Actual Tech Media for inviting me. I always love having these conversations, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can for you.
All right, super. Great stuff, Alan. And just to recap those points about top priorities for protecting people from, working from home. You mentioned email protection, regularly patching endpoints, patching work from home infrastructure like the VPN concentrators, monitoring for credential leaks through services like Have I Been Pwned? Pwned? How do you pronounce that again? Is it pwned?
Have I Been Pwned?
Okay. I've been reading that for a decade, but I'm never sure, like saying it out loud. And then, of course, MFA.
Yeah.
So, are you seeing a difference in the ransomware security posture between companies that were sort of born in the cloud and started out remote versus more brick and mortar office culture kind of companies that have had to, suddenly support remote work?
Oh, absolutely. And it's nothing is ever universal, but the
Sure.
companies that have built in the cloud and have always encouraged work from home, if not outright, like, hey, everybody work from home, they've been much more successful at adapting to the new reality. And again, as a general rule, they've been much more successful at adapting to the new reality, and had an easier time. I know that I personally have been into fewer incident responses for companies that are primarily cloud based and have a really good work from home culture.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so, aside from, and maybe it's just the five things that you sort of mentioned, those five key steps, but are there any lessons from those, sort of born remote companies that traditional companies can learn from?
So one of the things that I think is really interesting, and this I take it from my own experience. So as you said, I'm actually part of our CSER team, which is our internal security team at Recorded Future. So I
Okay.
deal with a lot of these same issues that you're talking about. But one of the things that I've really noticed about at least our employees, and I think a lot of primarily work from home employees, is that you have employees that are used to being independent, and so they are, I don't want to say inherently suspicious. Maybe that's just our employees, but I think there's a much more awareness there of, because they're operating out of their house or out of a coffee shop or out of a hotel, so they're much more aware of security threats. And so what I see in these environments is a lot more security threats being reported. Like, we, we're a relatively small company. We have 800 employees. We probably get 100 phishing reports a week from our employees, which is a lot for a company our size, because everybody is on high alert because they're used to operating independently.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, so, are there elements, those steps that you talked about, um, that are the most commonly overlooked, or maybe would have the most bang for the buck, in terms of, an initial investment? If you've supported all these work from home, remote workers, and you realize, okay, it's never really going back at our company, and we're not thrilled with our security posture. Where is sort of the best bang for the buck, to start with?
So I always tell people the best thing to do is start with communication. Because communication doesn't necessarily cost you anything, right? Um, just an email out to employees. This is kind of, we're primarily work from home, or we're going to have a lot more work from home. This is what's going to be expected from you. This is what we're going to do. Start with that so that you're having a dialogue. You Security never works when it's kind of handed down from on high. You always want to have a dialogue. Now, I say that sometimes in security, you just have to say, no, we can't do this. I'm sorry. It's never a good conversation to have, but sometimes that's just the reality. So having a conversation is what I always tell people to start with. And then as far as the steps that are there, regular patching, really important. Um, and then uh, monitoring for credential reuse. Ransomware actors last year, credential reuse attacks overtook phishing for the first time in terms of their popularity because they are cheap and easy to carry out. So a lot of people don't know this. If I want to launch a phishing attack, I can't just sit at my laptop and send out 10,000 emails. Like,
Okay.
whatever mail system I'm using is going to break. So I, as a threat actor, either have to purchase or rent phishing infrastructure. So, ransomware as a service, there's also phishing as a service. And, for $1,000, I can send out 1 million emails or whatever, but I have to have that $1,000. Credential reuse, I just have to scan all of the credential dumps that are out there and then run a scan against networks to see if I can find an open system. So all I need is a laptop and an internet connection. So it's become very, very popular. So as important as stopping phishing is overall, if you're specifically talking about ransomware, right now, monitoring for those credentials and enabling multi-factor authentication is going to have a lot more value. Still, again, plan on, if you don't have anything to protect against phishing in place, you should still plan on doing that, because there's a lot more than ransomware. There's business email compromise, credential theft, and so on, that are all happening over phishing. So you absolutely at some point need to do that.
Okay. And just on the definition of a credential reuse attack, that's when somebody has gone out and found a list of credentials that were exposed on other sites in other places, and trying those username and passwords on in the hopes that your users have used the same username and password combination.
Right. So
Within,
there's
yeah,
two ways it can be done. That's the way that we're primarily worried about, but there are also credential stuffing attacks, and that
okay,
is you take a common account name. So let's say I find an open remote desktop protocol server. Every Windows has an administrator account. So then I just try and I try the 100,000 most common passwords against that remote desktop protocol with that administrator account, and I try and gain access that way. Those attacks can be defeated by limiting the number of times that you can log in, or attempt to log in before the account is logged out, or by not allowing your administrator account to log in remotely. So there are other defeats for that type of attack. But
yeah,
you're absolutely right. The credential reuse is, I found a whole bunch of employee credentials. Now I'm going to take advantage of them.
gotcha. Yeah, and we have a question here from Judy, and everybody, send in your questions for Allan. We'd love to address them here. But Judy mentions, and this is partly a comment, I think it does matter how employees have been educated about the possibilities of the threats. I know our company is very active about this, and we do regular training on it. What do you find are some of the best practices for employee education?
So everybody's got their mandatory annual security training, right? You go and you've probably contracted out with a third company, and they have these videos that have these common security scenarios, and everybody kind of watches it while they're checking their email, or reading something else and so on. You have to do that. That's kind of your checkbox training.
Right.
um and but what I find is more effective is, like what we do is, we do every 2 weeks, we do kind of an office hours, if you will. I find that one-on-one training works a lot better. Like, people have questions, they don't want to ask the video, they don't necessarily want to email an alias, but if you can reach out to me on Slack during office hours, you can talk to me about things that you're concerned about, and I can explain it to you. And I find those tend to work really well. That's great. We're we're an 800-person company. We can do that. Larger companies, that might be a little harder to do. But if there's a way to replicate that personalized training as well, so one of the things that we did earlier this year, with travel starting back up for everybody, is we had a webinar where our CISO did a webinar on travel security. Like, here's the
Hmm.
things to think about while you're traveling. Here's your personal safety. Here are the countries you have to worry about. Here's where, hey, you should probably bring a loaner laptop with you and not bring your laptop. Those kind of things. And that was really popular. And then we had that on other topics as well. How to look for a phishing email, how to report it. Don't investigate anything. We have a team that investigates that. So if you think it's phishing, send it to us and we will let you know. We
Right.
appreciate the fact that you want to be proactive, but let us do that because we have the proper protections in place.
Yeah.
So those that kind of interpersonal one-on-one training tends to be much more popular, and I think resonates more with users, with the
That's
other fellow employees.
they're great points. And Judy, thanks for that comment. Appreciate it. It's funny because you had mentioned about recorded future, and I was thinking as you said it, it's like it's kind of a biased group, because I mean it's a security company, so your employees are going to be security focused, but you've pointed out the other side of that, which is they may be a little bit too confident. Oh, I can check this out. I can research it on my own and blow up the network. You did have that portion about blaming employees, the PEBCAC stuff, and how that can be misguided. So I'm just curious, and you got into this a little bit, but when it comes to the remote worker threat, do we sort of know the ballpark percentages for the origin of successful attacks? I mean, you mentioned credential stuffing, overtaking phishing, and you had some discussion of the VPN attacks in 2021, or the concentrators. What are sort of the ballpark percentages of where these successful like how these successful attacks occur?
So when we talk about and it varies a lot. One of the challenges with this is there is no centralized database for reporting all of this. Based on the latest available information, it looks like it's about 35% credential stuffing, credential reuse, then about
35.
33 to 34% of phishing, and about 25% exploitation. And then the rest is other. And other could be they came in from a third party. That's another big, huge problem that we're seeing is ransomware actor gains access to one company or organization and realizes that this company is interesting, but all of the companies they connect to are way more interesting. So I'm going to use them as a jumping point to there. We saw, we saw a huge jump in that last year. Still not enough to make the top three, but still a
Right.
big problem. Trojanized software, the rest are kind of spread out for kind of all these other things. But that's roughly the breakdown of what we're seeing.
Okay. So credential stuffing and phishing pretty much neck and neck, and then what was it?
Yeah,
The
and they
VPN
make
and,
up
and
they make up roughly 2/3 of all the
yeah,
attacks that we see.
it's huge. So both of those seem like things where end user training is incredibly important, as well as tools to shut it down.
Yeah, I
And
mean, absolutely. That's for both of those. That's what's really important. Hey, please don't reuse your corporate password anywhere else.
right.
Well, one of the things we've done is we've made password managers freely available to everybody. Like, we
Yeah.
pay for it and use it for your work stuff and your personal stuff. We don't care. Use a password manager, please. And I know there'll be people that tell you, well, don't use a password manager because if the password manager is compromised, then if the password manager is compromised, then all of your passwords are stolen. I get it. A password manager is still safer than reusing the same password for 50 different accounts.
Right.
It's just, there's risks in everything, but from at least from our point of view, a password manager is going to be safer. And to that end, we tell people please don't store passwords in the browser because like Chrome has the ability to automatically store passwords for you. The problem is there's a lot of malware out there that specifically reaches into Chrome and grabs all the passwords that are stored there. And the way they do that is once they get on your desktop, they elevate their credentials, and with those elevated credentials, they can steal all those passwords out of Chrome. So again, password managers are a big help there. But again, the communication and the why are so important. As always with security, being able to tell the story about why this is important is goes a long way to help getting people to agree to help.
Gotcha. And Allan, while we've got you here, one of the things I love about talking to you is just the way that you really stay on top of the latest trends. I understand there have been some. There was a new report this week, I think, out of the federal government involving North Korea and ransomware. What's going on there?
We have seen a huge jump over the last year, again, relatively speaking, in North Korea, ransomware originating from North Korea. So, those of you in the audience who've been around for a while are likely aware that North Korea was behind WannaCry. And in 2017, we definitely saw some activity out of North Korea and ransomware aside from WannaCry. But North Korea has been relatively quiet on the ransomware front, still doing a whole lot of awful things, but on the ransomware front, they've been relatively quiet. But in the last year, we've seen the Maui ransomware, which has gone after hospitals specifically, Holy Ghost ransomware, which has gone after small and medium-sized businesses. So think like real estate offices, dentist office, car dealerships, stuff like that, where the ransom is going to tend to be $50,000 to $100,000. So smaller ransomware amounts, but still often devastating for those businesses. And then NVH ransomware. So three new ransomware strains in the last year from North Korea, all of them government sponsored. Not, in other words, it's groups working for the government, so not independent cyber criminals the way we often see in Russia.
Right.
I am not a geopolitical expert, so if you're going to ask me why, my best guess is they're running out of money, and ransomware is a way to make some quick money, and they like Bitcoin. But please do not ask me to get in the head of Kim Jong Un. It's just not something I want to do.
I don't know if anybody can do
No.
that. I will ask you a geopolitical question, but just in the context of where ransomware is coming from and what some of the other trends are. I mean, like Russia was a major source, obviously. They've got their hands full with some other stuff at the moment, but and you mentioned North Korea is ramping up activity. Where are the attacks coming from internationally right now?
So still, Russia is still sort of like the center of all ransomware activity. Russian-based groups.
Yeah.
The affiliates that work for these ransomware actors are literally all over the world, but the Russian based groups are still kind of the center. We have seen an uptick in activity of ransomware coming out of Iran and coming out of China. The Iran ransomware, like North Korea, is largely state-sponsored, and they're targeting organizations of interest to the Iranian government. So we see a lot of utilities being targeted. We see a lot of targets in Israel. And then in China, we're seeing a mix of what looks like state-sponsored activity, but then also some cyber criminal activity. So, like for example, we've seen Coldlock and Deercry ransomware that have targeted ransomware coming out, targeted victims in Taiwan, for example, as sort of their primary victims. But then we've seen other ransomware campaigns that appear to be coming out of China that are doing things like taking advantage of Microsoft Exchange 0 days basically everywhere they can find them. So um, there's a lot of money to be made in ransomware, even with the price of Bitcoin where it is. No ransomware actor has said, well, it's $20,000 to, each Bitcoin is $20,000 instead of $65,000. It's time for me to hang it up and not do ransomware anymore. I wish they would, but that hasn't been the reality. And I think other threat actors are starting to realize that they can make a good amount of money following the Russia model. And it's also a level of plausible deniability because we have it in our head. Ransomware is cybercrime. So, like the Iranian government can say, I don't know why we have all of these ransomware actors, that are attacking. We'll definitely investigate that, but they're not tied to Iran. And so even though nobody really believes that, that at least gives them some level of deniability.
That's interesting. And yeah, I assume with the drop in the price of Bitcoin, um, ransomware actors have just increased the number of Bitcoin that they're asking for to keep the amounts the same. Is that what's
Correct.
happening?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, ransom, aside from possibly business email compromise, ransomware is the most profitable, even with the drop in Bitcoin, the most profitable cyber criminal activity out there. So you're spot on. They'll generally give a number, often in US dollars. So your ransomware is $1 million in Bitcoin rather than, 44 Bitcoin. Nope. Now I need 45. Now I need 46. They'll just
Right.
ask for a number in USD and whatever that turns out in Bitcoin.
And when we were talking before this session, you made a really interesting point related to some of those, um, you know, attacks coming from countries where the U.S. has sanctions against them, and it can be illegal to pay. So I guess I have two questions about that. One is, can you tell definitively where it's coming from that you would know that you were in trouble as far as making a payment? And so I'll just ask that one, and then I'll ask my other one after.
It depends. One of the reasons why the Department of Justice releases reports like they did about the Maui ransomware, or the Holy Ghost ransomware is to
Yeah.
definitively say this is North Korea. They want people to be aware that they could be paying into sanctions. If not, then no. A lot of ransomware actors go out of their way to hide what their ransomware is. So
Right.
you need to have a forensics team that comes in and does the analysis and can determine where the ransomwares originated from. But they do take great pains to pretend that they're coming from somewhere else, specifically for that reason. It means that you're more likely to get paid, but even so, it also gives the victims that level of deniability to say, "Oh, I didn't know that was North Korea."
Right. Gotcha. And the other part of that question is, if you are hit by ransomware that is coming from a country where there's a sanction, and it would technically be illegal to pay to get your data back, if you conclude that that's the only thing that you can do, um, do you have any options other than just sort of making a payment that you're aware may be illegal?
Reach out to the FBI. I've seen a few cases like that where if you reach out to the FBI or law enforcement, um, and they come in, they will tell you that and this is lawyer to lawyer, so I don't know how it's been done. That's above my pay grade. They will tell you, look, if you have to pay the ransom, go ahead and do it. We'll make sure that you aren't hit with sanctions or whatever.
Penalties,
There are
right?
always mitigating circumstances, and nobody wants to fine a victim if they don't have to. And so they're going to, avoid doing that whenever possible. But if you're cooperating with law enforcement, you're much more likely to kind of get a pass on these things. And as we saw with the North Korean ransomware, with the Maui ransomware, if the FBI knows that you paid the ransom, they can work to get that money back for you. Which they managed to get $500,000 worth of Maui ransomware payments back. It's not everything that was paid to the Maui ransomware group, but at least they got some of that back. And so, that goes a long way. And it's not the first time the Department of Justice has managed to do that.
Fascinating. Well, I guess this is probably a good place to leave it, Alan. But anything you want to say, just to sort of recap as a main, takeaway on the remote worker, defense?
Again, same thing. Communication is just critical. Communication. You gotta let your employees know what's going on. You got to work with your employees, and the more approachable your team is, the more likely you're going to survive an incident.
Gotcha. Well, Alan, thanks so much for coming on. It's always fun. It's always informative, and it's always scary to talk to you about ransomware. But I do enjoy it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we do have one more piece of business today, and that is the prize drawing. This is for the $300 Amazon gift card. And the winner of the gift card today is Kathy Tumlin from Tennessee. So congratulations to Kathy. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And before we go, I just want to mention Actual Tech Media's ransomware.org site. Everything you need to know about ransomware. It's a definitive ransomware resource. It is at ransomware.org. You can find Alan's blogs there. It's constantly updated with ransomware news and analysis. Great information there. And I'll also mention, don't miss our next ransomware series session with Alan next month. On August 12th, Alan will be talking about how to set up ransomware tripwires to monitor for threats. And this is going to be a great one. Especially because a lot of Alan's ideas here involve straightforward steps using tools and methods that you probably already have on hand. So lots of tips and tricks to help you defend your infrastructure, and you don't want to miss that one. So with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Again, that was Keeper, CrowdStrike, Rubrik, Duo, and OVH Cloud. And thanks as always for attending and for your questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.